You want the honest answer? Not much will actually happen to rich people under socialism. They'll genuinely be fine. A socialist president wouldn't make Jeff Bezos eat 100 billion Amazon boxes until his little tummy explodes. We're not gonna bring out the guillotines and pull up Forbes on our phones. There aren't gonna be free Rotten Tomato boxes from a local organic farm dropped around town. In a socialist society, a former billionaire or CEO would either stay in their position if their workers think they did a good job, or they'd get voted out. Their salary and earnings would probably be reduced so that the gap between the lowest paid and highest paid employee in any company goes down. If they're sitting on a dozen or so empty properties and new housing isn't enough to satisfy everyone's needs, they may only be allowed to keep 2, maybe even 3. If they got wealthy doing something despicable, like dumping toxic waste.
The point is, having 2 or 3 houses, as long as it is personal property, is still technically allowed. You can have a fucking summer home, you know what I mean? The idea that that is impossible, or that you can't have that, or that there is no way to do that, is very different than the concept of private ownership of property. Private property is property that you own with the express purpose of engaging in capital accumulation off of it. That's the difference.
Somewhere, their wealth may be used to fix the things they did wrong. And honestly, that's pretty much it. Nothing will really happen to the rich, as in the actual people. The category of rich will change, but we'll get to that. Anyway, first,
from each according to their wealth to each according to their need. Fuck this 3-house thing. Yeah, you got it, man. You got it. We can't even have fucking healthcare in this country, but you know, you're right. No, actually, we're coming for your toothbrush. Personal house used as a hotel? What?
For some reason, a lot of people are worried that socialism means going on a rampage. And the first thing we need to talk about to correct that impression is that most socialists aren't dumb. Every piece of socialist writing that has ever existed is constantly emphasizing that individual wealthy people are not the problem. Socialists in general recognize that almost anyone in Bezos' position would do what he does. Same goes for Zuckerberg, or Musk, or whoever your favorite billionaire is. Exploitation and environmental destruction and doing just about anything for a buck is the name of the game under capitalism. And that's what we take issue with. Not that Jeff specifically is the one doing it. This doesn't stop what these billionaires are doing from being wrong, but most of it is just perfectly legal, and all we'd want to do is change that to put an end to it, not to punish people. Just make the awful stuff stop. Most of us socialists take issue with the system of power and wealth accumulation that is capitalism, not the individuals who inevitably end up at the top. To put it differently, there are millions of jerks out there that are just as evil as Musk, but who are basically powerless simply because, under this economic system, power can only consolidate in a few people's hands. And I can tell you're skeptical. A lot of people are worried about what socialism might look like after a century of Red Scare rhetoric. It also doesn't help that past socialist revolutions, just like the liberal revolutions that gave us capitalism, have often been bloody affairs. It's normal to be concerned about that when people like me talk about making fundamental social and economic changes. The history of big changes hasn't often been a series of peaceful transitions of power. I think most historians would agree that's never been the case. I will point out, though, that there's a tremendous amount of bloodshed required to keep the current system chugging along. Billions of people are kept in artificial poverty when we have enough food and housing for all. Enough jobs that need doing so that no one needs to be unemployed. Enough resources to provide everyone with healthcare and education. Hundreds of thousands of protesters are brutalized by police and army forces when they complain that life is too expensive and the air is getting unbreathable. Not to mention how gruesome wars are constantly waged for the profit of a few defense and oil companies. But even given all that, it's still perfectly normal to be worried about the possibility of additional violence. And that's why I want to make this video. What I want to clear up is the false idea that violence against the wealthy would be a part of regular socialist society, because it simply wouldn't be. The main concern of socialism is equal democratic and economic power, a guaranteed higher standard of living coupled with a more extensive democracy. In this system, essentially, no one should get wealthy enough to exploit someone else and become democratically unaccountable. Businesses compete, the winners monopolize and oligopolize, and basic needs are gatekept while companies are given a license to destroy or appropriate common resources. The ultra-wealthy have an outsized influence in politics and in the workplace. and the entire economy is geared towards maximizing their ability to profit. In some cases, profit and human well-being go together. In most, not so much. Under capitalism, what decides if something happens isn't popular approval, but profitability, which is determined by how much employers exploit their employees, how wealthy or desperate their consumers are, and even how recklessly they can destroy
This. What are you doing, bro? Are you fucking drunk? What's happening?
the environment. The idea is to stop all that by bringing the economy under democratic control. To have workers elect their boss, or choose to restructure their workplace entirely based on their expertise in actually doing the work. To have natural monopolies and other parts of the economy controlled by a democratic government. To have some market mechanisms not guided by profit. To replace private banks with public banks, with appointed or elected representatives. Instead of a board of directors trying to figure out how to make workers pee in more bottles, a democratic council would decide the best way to use something like Amazon's distribution network and algorithms to actually benefit society. The point is, nothing happens to wealthy people under this arrangement. The rich are just not part of the plan. Not the individuals, they can stick around, but the idea of someone getting obscenely wealthy in this society seems pretty pointless, and ideally impossible. As a real-life anecdote, look at how the last emperor of China was treated after their revolution. They didn't off the guy.
He's on TikTok, brother. What do you mean? He's fucking. You know how a man was treated, dude? Let me see. Wait, fuck. There's no. Does anyone have that video? I love that video. You know what I'm talking about? The one where he's dancing, like the modern Puyi.
One eternity later.
Oh, here. This is how. He's got anime cutie pies all around him. What the fuck? Are we really pretending they look alike? Really, dude? Like, is it racism? Are we doing xenophobia when this guy's entire account is dedicated to? First of all, we're not pretending they look alike. We're pretending that it is him. Okay? And it is ridiculous to be like, wow, dude, I can't believe how xenophobic these guys are being when like. This Chinese man's entire fucking account is dedicated to making that comparison himself, okay? Like, what are you gonna cancel a Chinese guy for having fun with it? That's crazy. White leftists in America. When did I say it was racism or xenophobia? I don't know. I can't tell if you're like why did you come at it like with such strong opposition over here? Unless you were just like actually also joking and saying, no, that's actually him. Are we pretending that they look alike? Anyway, yeah, that's Puyi. That's what happened to him. You know.
They gave him a re-education, helped him understand why the position of emperor was outdated, and eventually he became a member of China's National People's Congress, helping to make progress alongside the very same people he had previously oppressed. He was reintegrated into a better society. In a future socialist system, the rich and powerful themselves would be fine, but most of the privileges and access to power that create billionaire levels of wealth just wouldn't exist. The only way to become incredibly wealthy in a socialist society is to have a unique set of skills, the way an actor or an athlete becomes incredibly wealthy under capitalism. Being basically irreplaceable might command a higher price for your labor, but even then, you'd still end up with a much more equal society. Some inequality might still persist, but at a much different scale and within a much smaller range. The difference between capitalism and socialism is that you wouldn't be able to get wealthy by paying workers less than the amount they bring in for your company. You couldn't gain wealth by exploitation, and that's it. You're still skeptical. No problem. Here's another reason you shouldn't be worried about what happens to rich people under socialism. Most socialists are very anti-punishment. Just talk to your lefty friends and you'll see. Most socialists today are at the forefront of the restorative and transformative justice movements, as well as the prison abolition and anti-death penalty movements. The most famous representative of this socialist position is probably someone like Angela Davis, who's campaigned for all of these causes for decades. The idea of punitive justice, or the eye for an eye logic that governs a lot of our justice system today, is deeply unpopular in the modern left, and one of the things that socialists are adamantly against. In parallel to socialist ideas about changing systems, we would much rather make crime less economically necessary or less enticing by ensuring everyone's needs are met unconditionally than by threatening people with a violent state apparatus. We would much rather strip people of their power over others and institute a more developed democracy that extends to the workplace than allow a few to gain power through exploitation and punish them when they, predictably, use that power to those ends. Socialists promote structural change first and foremost, and are against punitive justice as a way to solve structural issues. The idea that this would just not apply to those who happen to be wealthy is possible, but realistically very unlikely. And of course, this isn't to say that a socialist society would be without the means to punish people who commit crimes. Historically, after every revolution, there have been elements, often funded by one of the capitalist powers, that tried to undermine the socialist project through acts of terror. This wouldn't be acceptable in a socialist society any more than it is in a capitalist one. Those people would still face the consequences of their actions, whatever those consequences are determined to be. But on the whole, the goal of socialist justice is to be.
It is always funny when capitalists talk about like a socialist transition and the inevitable violence, and they become the most like ridiculous across the board humanitarian anarchists in that very moment where they're like, well, any kind of transition to power requires violence. Like, what do you mean? And it's like, okay, so do you think the current system is violent? Like, is it violent for the majority? Do you recognize that then? Because it's always the same projection, right? It's the same principle behind white people fearing being the minority in America because they know what they've done to minorities in the past. And what if minorities will enact the same kind of violent retribution against them? Well, what if they don't? You know? I saw this before. I saw this earlier today on Twitter where someone was talking about these fucking ghouls on the right who were like talking about how the guy who wanted people to recycle got fucking violently stabbed in Brooklyn, and they were celebrating it. And then after they were done celebrating it, like yesterday, they were now talking about how like, well, they actually deserve it. These leftists deserve being punished this way because they hate us in the same exact way. How dare you? And a comment on that that stuck with me that I also regularly mention is that, yeah, I fucking hate right-wingers. Like, it's not a secret that I hate right-wingers. It's not a secret that I hate reactionary people. It's not a secret that I fucking hate fascists. But I still want them to have healthcare. I still want them to have education. I still want them to have a comfortable existence, right? I want to make it so that the material conditions are so well for them that it's virtually impossible for them to still maintain a position that they are like violent reactionaries. Will they still exist under a similar situation? Certainly, but if everything is set up, then most people will already outcast them as social pariahs in general. Obviously, there will still be an enforcement mechanism, but you know, that's the major difference between, in my opinion, a lot of people who are empathetic and socialist versus people who are fascist. There is no peaceful ethnic cleansing. Okay? That doesn't happen. If you're a fascist, your goal is to ultimately rid everywhere of whatever you declare the outgroup. Okay? But under a socialist organization of the economy, it's not supposed to happen. There is no ethnic cleansing in that structure. There is no outgroup that needs to be violently purged. You know? Don't forget that going back to being a worker is a fate worse than death for some. Yeah. The point is, there is no outgroup in that structure. There is no outgroup in that structure, and their violence does not need to happen in that situation at all. It does not. Violence, however, is oftentimes a historic constant, but I won't stop pushing for an ideal transition. You know what I mean? How do you tackle the argument that we are idealists? What do you mean? You need idealists. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, oh, it doesn't work in practice type shit. If people claim that it doesn't work in practice, then they're just objectively wrong. I think that capitalism was useful historically, and it has outlived its usefulness. But those who brought about these changes, who at least sit at the top of the structure, refuse to let go. Capitalism is a system that necessitates violence for its own maintenance. There is no way that this structure holds together, this unjustifiable structure where the majority serve the interests of the few, the tiny minuscule minority, without a constant flow of violence. It is inherently less violent to evolve out of this economic organization to a better one.